Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey and Kyle Fredrickson today from the Omni Hotel in Dallas, Texas. We're here for the Big 12 Media Day. Guys, a little bit different this year because OU and OSU go on the same day on Tuesday, and we're here on Monday, and there's Texas Tech, Kansas State, TCU is the big one that's up today, but no OU or OSU. Little strange for us this time around.
Definitely a little strange. We did get to hear from Bob Bowlsby this morning. I think that really created some of the best storylines of the day, just seeing what he had to say. I mean, of all the topics he covered, what did you guys find the most interesting this morning?
Well, I was interested in the fact that the Big 12 is not going to ban court storming or field storming. The SEC has actually just increased their penalties. The first-time offense is $50,000 to the school. They're not going to do that in the Big 12. But I think that's good. I like court storming and field storming, and obviously they have to do their best to keep them, to keep everybody secure and make sure nobody gets hurt. But that's a pretty big part of college sports.
And the difference between college athletics and in the NFL and the NBA and is the passion and the enthusiasm that the fans bring, and certainly storming the court, storming the field, as we saw a couple years ago at the end of Bedlam, and as we saw this year with basketball with Kansas and Kansas State. There's some unfortunate incidents that come along with that, but at the same time, you don't want to take away from what makes college sports so special. No, you don't, and I think that's good that they're at least going to try to maintain that.
Talking about the Bob Bowlsby announced that they're going to limit their teams to 2 days of contact per week. I think that's very interesting, and be interesting to see sort of how that plays out. But I mean, there were a lot of things that they talked about, and obviously we heard about the potential expansion and championship game. I mean, those subjects are a little played out, though. I mean, I sort of knew what he was going to say on a lot of that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That subject does get old. I know it's something that we've got to talk about every time this thing rolls around, as long as this league only has 10 members. But, Jason, you brought it up, but the no contact or limited contact rule was really interesting. The NCAA mandates 3 contact days during the week, one of them that includes the game. The Big 12 went a step farther and cut it down to 2. Now, guys who don't play in the game can go through another contact practice. There can be a little bit more. You can spread them out over a few days. But how much of a difference do y'all think that this really makes in the grand scheme of things?
Not much. I mean, I think –
And OSU and Mike Gundy,
right.
He's been very limited with the contact that they go through.
Absolutely. It's been a few years now that Mike Gundy's really, in a lot of ways, spearheaded this kind of effort to say, hey, we don't need to be hitting each other all the time in practice. Let's keep guys fresh. With all the concussion talk that's been going on, at the college level and especially at the pro level, I don't think it's a big deal. And from the coaches we talked to today, obviously it's just half of the group. There really wasn't a guy in the bunch who was in disagreement with this. This seems to be the way that football is trending. And I know there's going to be some football diehards and maybe even some people listening to this podcast. Maybe this is the wussification of the game or something like that. But, this is just the reality of the sports world we live in, that safety is going to come ahead of pretty much everything else.
Yeah, I do think that there are going to be some people who make some good points about if you're not practicing tackling, it's going to be hard to replicate it in the games, do it effectively in games. I understand those points. I think obviously OSU has risen this no contact thing, and that's sort of been on scale with their rise in the college football world. But but the more finesse teams like that tend to not win the big games, tend to not win the national championships. It's the Ohio States, it's the Alabamas that win the national championships. The gimmicky offenses and the teams that don't hit as hard and those sorts of teams, they just don't win the national championship. I mean, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong at all. Is this the case, though, and we've heard coach after coach today say it's not really a big deal. I think a couple of them act like that they would have rather that limit not be in place, but at the same time, none of them said, oh, it's really going to hurt our product. But is it a case of the Big 12, because of all the coaches saying, we pretty much do this anyway, jumping out ahead of an issue and being able to say we were first on this, when in reality it doesn't really amount to much?
Yeah, there's a PR feel to this for them to come out and say, look at how safe we're being, look at, we're spearheading all of this. And my question is, how are you going to enforce it? I mean, are there going to be NCAA officials at practice and counting the number of times guys butt heads? I mean, how far down this road do we actually go?
Yeah.
But still, it's going to remain an issue. It's a hot topic, and certainly worthy of us really delving into.
I mean, yeah, because it's absolutely important to they have to think about player safety with all we know now about concussions and the damage they cause down the road with these people's lives. And the potentially deadly consequences that concussions can have for guys when they get into their 40s and 50s. It's certainly a topic worth thinking about and trying to do things to curb the violence in the game. I just wonder about the effect that could have on Big 12 teams when it comes time to play in these big games. Because the thing is, I can't remember which coach it was. That said, well, was it a coach or was it? It was Matt Leinart when I was talking to Matt Leinart earlier. Wasn't a coach.
Jason.
No, it was when I interviewed Matt Leinart earlier today. He's here working for Fox Sports, and I asked him about it, and he said that it's not a big deal because he said, the thing is these players know how to tackle. And that may be true, but some of especially the young ones, they don't know how to tackle guys at this level. And if they're only getting to practice it a few days a week, I could see that being a problem. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay what they're doing. I think it's important, and obviously they're trying to tackle an important issue. But I think there might be consequences.
Yeah, and we've already seen some former players jump out on Twitter. J.D. Reynolds, one of our great friends of the program, as we like to call him, he came out and said what they used to do when he was there. Teddy Lehman, obviously a fantastic linebacker during his time at OU, said that this will make defenses make it tougher to have a really good defense in this league because you're not practicing tackling on a regular basis. But Bob Bowlsby brought up something during his conversation is the NFL only allows 11 contact days from the end of training camp, which is less than one a season. So how much of an effect is that really going to have when the NFL doesn't do much contact at all?
You know what I think the biggest effect is going to be? Every single Big 12 fan base now has an excuse when their team loses, right? I mean, well, they don't let our guys tackle. I mean, what do they expect? Of course we couldn't win. So I don't know. I mean, that's probably a side effect as well.
Well, I will say though about the NFL. I mean, the NFL, those guys they've been doing it at the college level, and I realize the NFL game is more violent and they're stronger, but these aren't kids who are coming in from high school and trying to learn how to tackle the big elite athletes. I mean, a lot of these guys, when they come from high school, they've been playing against people like me in my old Noble High days. Okay, that's
you were recruited by Miami.
Yeah, well, all right. I don't think people know that story. We'll save that for another day. But so I understand why maybe the NFL and also the NFL is worried about lawsuits and all kinds of stuff. They're in the middle of all kinds.
And the players hold more sway, for better or worse, than they do at this level.
Yeah, they do. I mean, with the union and all of that. So I don't know. I'm not opposed to it. I guess I'm trying to play devil's advocate a little bit.
I mean, it's certainly something worth looking at from all sides as the Big 12 has taken this step forward when. Not every other conference has done something like this. Now, going into today, we talked about the lack of star power on this Monday with really TCU and Bill Snyder is always interesting and Bob Bowlsby, but it's certainly nothing like what we're going to see tomorrow. From what we've seen today so far, what we've heard, what have y'all found out that you want to ask tomorrow more than what we talked about last week when we were talking about what we're looking forward to at this event?
Well, I think one of the interesting questions that Jason actually posed to Bowlsby was the domestic violence issue. The SEC enforcing a new policy where they won't accept transfers who have a history of domestic violence to a certain point. I'm not exactly sure what level of crime that constitutes them not allowing them to come in. But this is a question for these coaches. It's a question for these players. How often are these conversations being had? Is this something that you guys would consider? And Bowlsby said, he just found out about what the SEC was doing just recently. So those conversations haven't even happened yet. I mean, Jason is someone who's written about Joe Mixon's situation and Frank Shannon. What does this make you think when Bowlsby says, well, we haven't really had these conversations yet?
Well, I don't know that you can really make too much of it. I found it interesting that the SEC took this step. To me, what I'm sort of interested in finding out tomorrow is, so you have a guy like Mike Gundy who tossed Tyreek Hill right off the team the second that came out, or that he found out about what Tyreek Hill was alleged to have done to his girlfriend, right? But would he be open to taking a player in who's been kicked off somewhere else for that? Because that, to me, I sort of understand why when a guy gets kicked off the team, you got to get him out, but you're also maybe willing to give a different guy a fresh start.
Yeah. But then there's also the balance of wanting to give a guy a second chance, like OU has done with Joe Mixon, that you feel like the kid, what he's really like, and you can tell if this is an aberration or if this is something that is an indication of what kind of kid he truly is.
Yeah, and so I would be interested to hear what Mike Gundy has to say. Well, I guess it'll all depend on what kind of mood he's in tomorrow. And really the same thing with Bob Stoops, maybe not so much with that, because it hits a little close to home, I think, for him. Right now with all the with Joe Mixon, Frank Shannon, but on some of the other things, the limiting the contact and even the rushing the field, I'd be interested to know Bob Stoops' thoughts, because he's been right there in the middle of a few field rushes, not in a long time, but I remember when fans rushed the field at 2000, the OU Nebraska game, and tore down the goalpost. I remember all of those things, and be interesting.
I remember that because I didn't directly catch the pepper spray, but I was pretty close to it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's interesting. But
and I remember BBJ, somebody that we've had some great memories of over the last few weeks. He caught it pretty full force during the aftermath of that, and came in. Remember coming in with his eyes watering and all of that stuff with the craziness of the aftermath of that game.
Right. And then change topics a little bit here, guys. One other thing I thought was interesting from today is we got our first glimpse of David Beatty.
That guy's awesome.
Yeah, and and do not apologize if you don't know the name that I just read. He is a newbie to the conference, Kansas's first-year head coach. Like Jason said, just a guy that you can't help but like after today. Came into his press conference with a ton of energy. And if you're the Kansas's coach, you better be doing that. This is a team that's in the Big 12 basement. I mean, leagues, I think, below even the lowest of the Big 12 right now. Mm-hmm. So it's a tough rebuilding job. But to see him come in here with that energy, talk about his experience being a high school coach in Texas, being back here and everything that goes with that, I think it's kind of refreshing, because a lot of these coaches, they kind of mumble their way through this and get it over with, as to where he was, genuinely excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's such a stark contrast from the Kansas representation that's been here the last couple of years with Charlie Weiss saying
Mr. Positivity,
saying that his players were pieces of crap and stuff. That was refreshing, and you can't help but want a guy like that to succeed. And I know this is the first time any of us have ever been around him. But it was still kind of neat to see that a guy who has really no reason to be optimistic about this season. I mean, they really don't, but he is, and I think that's interesting. I do think it's interesting, and it'll be really cool to see sort of how this progresses for him this year, and if he stays that happy.
But David Beatty really knows his audience too, and knows what's important for Kansas to be able to get back to the level that it was under Jason's good friend Mark Mangino. I mean, really, his opening statement today wasn't a pitch to us. It wasn't a pitch to the guys on his team. It was a pitch to Texas high school football players come play for the Jayhawks.
Yeah. Hey, and, if you're an under-recruited guy and he comes into your living room with a high-energy kind of speech like that, and that's something you can believe in, I mean, I could see how kids might want to buy into that a little bit.
Yeah,
despite the records over the past few seasons.
No doubt about it. And despite the struggles that they're going to have this year, because it is going to be a rough year for Kansas on the football field. I mean, this could be the worst team in the Big 12 history.
It could be tough. Another interesting tidbit from today, I thought it was pretty good. Cliff Kingsbury goes to the podium, and right off the bat, bam, here comes Ryan Aber with the so how do you reflect on old Baker Mayfield? And tell us about his response.
Yeah, he didn't really give me much of one outside of I really haven't thought about that much.
That's not true.
No, it's not
flat
true
out
at
not
all.
true.
And he knew the question was coming, I'm sure. But he did give what was, I guess, the classiest response that could have been expected. He said, I hope Baker Mayfield has success in every game but one, which will be, about midway through the season when OU hosts Texas Tech. Be much more interesting if that game was in Lubbock this year. But Baker Mayfield has made his return trip to Lubbock. He went down there last year, and we got to experience the raining down of colorful language from the Red Raider faithful. But it was certainly an interesting reception down there, and I'm sure it'll be really interesting this year when Texas Tech and OU play, regardless of where it is, if Baker Mayfield is the quarterback. And
I think we can agree that he probably will be.
Yes, but, I haven't had any indication to think that anybody else is going to be the starting quarterback of this team.
Except that tomorrow we will be joined by one Trevor Knight.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit on our last podcast, that it's one, because you're not worried about how Trevor Knight's going to handle that situation. Yes, he's going to get asked the quarterback question about 75 to 350 times, but Trevor Knight's a guy who's shown leadership. He's shown that he can handle the barrage of questions that comes along with being a quarterback. It was interesting to see him brought down into this event with guys like Ty Darlington and Eric Stryker and Sterling Shepard, but I don't think there's very much doubt that Trevor Knight will handle everything superbly tomorrow.
Yeah, he will. He'll handle things well. It's just so weird that Bob Stoops has always been so careful about not putting his quarterbacks in a position where they have to answer questions like that, and he's putting Trevor Knight in one where he's just going to be bombarded with it tomorrow, and so it'll be really interesting to see how he handles it. But I do think he'll handle it well.
Yeah, Kyle, we can't get out of this podcast. We talked last week during the podcast where you joined us about your Sunday package, the play that changed it all,
right.
Part 2. That ran in Sunday's paper. It was fantastic.
Appreciate it.
What's the reaction that you've gotten from it, and just the final stages of putting it together since we last talked? How did that go, and the way that everything has come together with that package?
Yeah, definitely happy with how it came together. One thing I found interesting about the process is that obviously this is part 2 in the play that changed it all, but really just it's so drastically different than part 1. And I think that came out in the writing of the story. Obviously, like Jason, you go in depth into the play and try to uncover some things that we missed. But there's no avoiding this play. There's no taking this play and saying, oh, hey, remember when this happened? It's like, oh, no, we know this happened.
Yeah, and we're talking about from either side, either
right,
the OU or
right,
the OSU side.
Right. So, it was interesting from that perspective. I thought that the reaction that I got was certainly mixed. I had OU fans telling me, hey, good job for taking down Stoops. Finally someone says something about how terrible this play was. And then OSU fans, kind of questioning, why are you writing this now? Why are we even bringing this up? Well, it's the summertime. It's a good time to dive into it. But I think overall, people appreciated just the fact that, we did take some time to break down this play and write about it more because, it's certainly worthy of it.
Yeah, and it's not like we didn't write about it in the aftermath of the play and, even in the months since. But I think this is a perfect time to let everything sink in, and when you can fully feel the weight of what this play meant for both programs. And, of course, last year we wrote this, and the team sort of diverged and things completely changed, and maybe that happens the same way this year. But at the same time, you can fully feel the weight of how important this play is for this season that's coming up.
No doubt about it. I mean, it definitely resonates going into this year, and it's interesting for so many reasons, as Kyle has gotten into. I mean, the way that it made OU fans maybe view Bob Stoops a little differently. The way that it propelled OSU into a bowl game, and this year feels way different for them. And then, it's also got a little bit of a it's got some relevance in terms of the domestic violence conversation we've been having, and so it really it's just a really interesting play, really interesting moment that I don't think anybody will forget anytime soon.
Absolutely, and once again, I thought Kyle did a fantastic job with that package, as you did last year with the play that changed it all, part 1.
Well, thank you. Kyle did a great job. He always does.
Of course. Well, that's all the time we have for today. We're going to get back to work here at Big 12 Media Days, but OU and OSU up on the docket for Tuesday. You can check us out every day at newsok.com and every morning in the Oklahoman for the best OU and OSU coverage anywhere.